I'm sorry?
I'm not over the polish, I'm with Jack.
Oh, yeah. Oh, get out of here. Okay, so other than that, it's on auto run, the whole thing. Yeah, right. Any other thing you want to mention? Okay, so we're in Romans chapter 11, and we're going to get it through the whole chapter. We just have to because, well, we just will. As I sent out in the email, this chapter is really controversial. There's a lot of false doctrine taught about it, mainly that when it comes to the Jewish people, there's a thinking or a narrative that they're still God's chosen people, and God's going to save all of them someday in the future, all right? And I'll show you the text that they will use in chapter 11 to teach that, but we'll try to demonstrate that's not what it's saying at all, but we'll show what it does say. So it's all about grafting. And if you look in verse 22, and then we'll have a prayer, we're going to see the kind of theme here, because it's almost a Jew-Gentile thing, as we've been seeing in this whole book. Because look in verse 1 of chapter 11. What's the question?
God has not rejected his people?
Yeah, has God rejected the Jews? That's the question. He's going to deal with all this, okay? So when we get down into verse 22 then, we see, behold the kindness and severity of God. Do you see there's a twofold picture of God? Kindness and severity. People love his grace and like to talk about the love of God, but not the severity of God. To those who fell, severity, but to you, God's kindness. If you continue in his kindness, otherwise you're going to be what? Cut off. Also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, that's the Jews, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. So I'm going to call this lesson grafted, okay? So let's have a prayer, then we'll talk about it. And it's good to have Lisa with us. She was in the hospital next week too, and she's got pain in her side, but she doesn't know what it is. The doctors don't. So I want to keep her in our prayers. Mr. Larson, could you lead us in prayer, please?
Merciful God, Father in heaven, again, we thank you for the opportunity to come here this midweek to study a portion of your word as we look at Romans here, the 11th chapter. We pray that our minds might be focused upon the lesson this hour, this study, that we can glean from it, make applications in our lives, that we might walk more pure in your sight and to do those things that you have us to do. Be with those who have been mentioned who are sick and afflicted because of the body. We continue to remember Ron and Mel as he continues to have issues with his physical body. We pray for him and for his comfort, for the family. And we just pray for Rob and Peggy too as they're coming back now, and pray that you allow them to get here safely. And we pray for Lisa too and the pain that she is suffering. Be with my son David as he's not feeling well tonight. And just be with all the members here that are having difficult situations with their health. Help us to move forward. We're excited for Jeff Bronson's dad who was baptized, and we're grateful for that, the efforts that made that happen. And we're just thankful and grateful for the expanding of your kingdom, the borders of your kingdom, that we might all have that same desire to be involved in teaching others. Go with us now through this hour. Watch out over us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And also Jesse emailed and said David's got the same crud coughing, so they couldn't come either. But hi if they're watching. Yes. Stable. She's got a surgery scheduled for later in the month, and just thank you for asking. But she just always on pins and needles because she didn't know when it's going to happen again. All right, thank you. All right, so when we look at this here, we're in this last section of the doctrinal part where we're trying to vindicate God. In other words, defend God's honor, because not that he needs defense, but people will try to accuse him in the first century and maybe even today. And that's what we're going to see here is, did God reject his chosen people, the Jews? And of course, the answer is going to be no. But that's where we're going to see that he's going to say all of Israel is going to be saved. That's going to be in verse 26. Now, when you look at that verse, there's a lot of false doctrine taught from this that God's going to say all of Israel en masse. I'm talking about ethnic Israel. If you got Jewish blood or the blood of Abraham, someday Jesus is going to come, and when he comes in the last days, all the Jews alive at that moment are going to be saved en masse. All right? And they will use this text as well as others to prove that. But when we look at that, there's 4 views of this verse. And the first view is that every Jew ever lived is all Israel, and therefore every Jew is going to be saved. That's from the day of Jesus all the way up until the present. Every Jew that has ever lived, all of Israel. Some would say, no, the new Israel is the church, and there's some credence to that in Romans 2. What is a true Jew? Someone circumcised outwardly or inwardly, all right? And so it's the church, both Jew and Gentile, but those who have faith in Christ throughout all the generations from Jesus on. The third view is it's Jewish believers who are ethnically Jews, but they became believers throughout all the generations, okay? And then the fourth one is everyone who is an ethnic Jew is going to be saved in the last day, all right? And so that's why this chapter is very controversial. There's a lot of different views on it, and people defend one over the other. And which one do you think we're going to pick? We'll have to wait and see, okay? But here's John Piper, and you might not know him, but some of you might have read him. He is a chancellor of a Bible college, Bethany Bible College, and he says, not all Israel may be saved, but all Israel will be saved. Not everyone agrees that all Israel refers to the nation as a whole, alive in some future generation. Some take Israel to refer to the one true spiritual Israel, including Jews and Gentiles. In other words, the integrated church, right? Okay. Others take it to refer to the remnant of believing ethnic Israel that is being saved all along through faith in Christ. That would be the second view that I shared with you. Both of these views deny what I've been arguing for, that there'll be a great and stupendous national conversion of Israel someday. They're looking for when Jesus comes, there'll be the rapture, and he'll set up his throne, and every Jew will be saved. All right? And they take it from this verse. One more. This is from a website, One Israel, Ministry, and they're trying to disciple Jews. But they say all of Israel will accept the Messiah en masse. That's when God will come in the last moment. They're all going to be converted, 100% of them, because all means what? All right, okay, there's so many problems with all this, and so that's what we're going to talk about. So here's again the question. Does Paul like to ask questions and answer them? Remember in chapter 6, shall we sin that grace may abound? What did he say? God forbid. And this is the same way he repeats it here. He asks lots of questions because he knows his readers are already thinking that if they follow his teaching. Like, well, that means, God forbid. So here's the question. Did God reject the Jews? Because we know that God made a choice through Abraham. Through thy seed, I'm going to make a great nation, right? Huh? Well, of course not. But they rejected him. That's right. But the thinking was that I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And he took Israel out of Egypt into Mount Sinai. And then he gave them the 10 commandments. And he said, you'll be a chosen people of mine. All right? And he entered into a covenant with them. And those who were not my people are now my people. And you are, of all the nations, you are my chosen nation. Now, was that true? Yes. So what happened, if Jesus is the Messiah, how come the Jews rejected him, and how come they're not being saved? Did God turn his back on the Jews? Well, as Max already said, no, it was actually the other way. The Jews turned their back on God. And the final thing they did was crucify Jesus. Now, we've always maintained out of all of ethnic Israel, there's a remnant. What do we call them? The faithful, right? And in many aspects, they're the true Israel, right? Just because you had the blood of Abraham in and you didn't make you automatically God's chosen people, it was the faithful because it was always based on one's heart. It's always been that way. The just shall live by their faith. Habakkuk says, yes.
And we see that with when the church began, those first 3,000 that were baptized.
Right.
Jews that came to Christ.
They were all Jews.
Yes.
That's right. When the first Gentile was until, we know Acts where?
10.
Acts 10. Very good. Cornelius. Okay? So, Paul says, may it never be. And the first example to prove that God hasn't rejected his Jews, he says, look at me. He says, I am an Israelite too. They forget that, right? They think he's just a big gospel preacher of the Christian way. But I'm a descendant of Abraham, the tribe of Benjamin. And he can talk about his credentials. He was a Pharisee among Pharisees, the most zealous, and taught by the feet of Gamaliel. And says, what about me? And also, he was the greatest antagonist against the church and persecutor of the church. But he was wrong, and he realized that because of his ignorance. Did God turn his back on Paul? No, he saved him. And he's an example of God can save the chief of sinners. Who can he save? Anyone. So Paul, starts with that, that I was lost, but he did this. God does not reject his people. Or do you not know the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, this has often been the case, that people think they're the only ones, God's abandoned his people. Do you not know that the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, who is Elijah? One of the great prophets, right? When it comes to the lawgiver, we think Moses. When we think of the prophets, we think Elijah. That's who appeared to Jesus on the Mount Transfiguration. Moses and Elijah. They're the two figureheads. So he had just slew the false prophets on Mount Carmel, but now there's a death sentence on him, and he's hiding in a cave, and he's thinking, I'm the only guy left. And God's just kind of abandoned me. Verse 3, Lord, they have killed thy prophets, and they have torn down thy altars, and I alone am left, and they are seeking my life. Remember that account? But what is the divine response? Paul asks in verse 4 to him. He says, I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed down the knee to Baal. So when we look at this, he is not whining, but he feels alone and isolated. Have you ever felt that way as a Christian? That there's nobody out there but you, and no one understands? That was Elijah hiding in a cave because they're trying to kill him. But God says, no. Get up, get going. 7,000 men, not counting women and all that, who have never bent the knee to an idol. Now, so here's all of Israel, the green, that's ethnic Israel. They have the DNA of Abraham in their veins, right? But the remnant is the faithful Israel. Because God, what was the second command? No other idols, yeah. You should not worship other gods. They've all broke the covenant. So who rejected who, as Max said? God didn't reject them. He's been pleading with them through all the prophets. It's the same thing today. Christ has come, and he's made it very simple. Those that live by faith are going to be righteous. Just follow me. But people are just following their own wills and their ways in the name of Christ, and they haven't. God will never reject them, but people have rejected Jesus, haven't they? It's the same story, exactly. So when we look at this, Paul's going to make the same argument about currently in the New Testament times. When he writes this, right? It's the first century. Got to remember that. In the same way, there's also going to be at the present time. What is that time? Don't say right now.
Present time is current time. Current then.
Thank you. It's Paul's day, not our day. When we read that, we go, oh yeah, 2024. We do that all the time. We somehow just, oh, he's talking to us. No, who's he writing to? Christians in Rome that lived in the first century prior to 70 AD. It's before the destruction of Jerusalem. So the present time he's talking about is back in the first century, 2,000 years ago. He says there's what? What does he say? A remnant. A remnant of who? Jews or Gentiles? Jews. They're the faithful. According to God's gracious choice. And if it's by grace, then it's not by works. That's the whole theme of Romans, right? You can't be good enough to get into heaven, and you can't be bad enough to get out of or stay out of heaven. Paul's an example of that. It's all about what? Grace. And it's not a basis of works, otherwise grace is no longer grace. That's the whole theme of it. But this remnant are the Jews who have now become Christians in the first century church. Now, as David pointed out, the church started with how many individuals being saved? 3,000. And they were all what? Jews. That's part of the remnant. Yep. In chapter 4, it says there were 4,000 or 5,000 more. That's what? Part of the remnant. Now, to get to Acts 13, Paul in his Antioch, when his first missionary journey, he's teaching a synagogue, and the Jews got so upset, Paul said, behold, since you repudiate or reject God's word, I'm turning to the Gentiles. And that he made a matter. Like, what? Those heathens, they hated Gentiles. But there's always been a what? A remnant. Now, I just got to stop and take this out of context and just think about today. Have you ever wondered why a lot of people don't obey Christ? Because there's only a remnant that's faithful to God. They have good hearts. They're truth seekers. And when we share the gospel with them, yeah, I'll respond. I don't think John will mind me saying, but he said, I thought I would never see this day coming, talking about his dad getting saved. Jeff talking about his dad, John, because of his past life. And I said, thank God for the power of the gospel. It's the power of God unto salvation. But it showed also he had what? A good heart. Even though maybe he lived a bad life, like all of us, he had a good heart. And maybe he was open, because when you have physical trials and you're near death, that makes you think more soberly, and that's good. But some people get mad at God at those times too. But the good-hearted people, you wonder why you get family members or friends, they just don't care. It's because there's only a remnant. There's only the few versus the many. And that's sad. But Satan has blinded so many people in this world, hasn't he? We're just looking for the remnant. Okay, so verse 6. It's always God's choice to save anyone and everyone who what? Isn't that the whole theme? Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, Jew first, then also the Gentile or the Greeks. God has not rejected anyone. He just wants you to have faith. And then here it's faith in Jesus. So verse 7. What shall we say then? That which Israel is seeking for, this is what's interesting, the Messiah, it is not obtained. But those who were chosen obtained it, and the rest were hardened. Just as it is written, God gave them a spirit of stupor, I'm in verse 8, eyes to see and ears to hear not, down to this very day. Verse 9, and David says, quoting David of the Old Testament, let their table become a snare and a trap and a stumbling block and a retribution to them, that their eyes be darkened to see and bend their backs forever. Okay? Now, when you quote the Old Testament for a Jewish listener, that's like God talking to them. They believe it's true. That's why he's doing this, okay? But he's also showing that it's always been this case. There's been the few that are faithful, the remnant, and the rest have these hardened hearts. Now, some of this language is kind of hard, okay? When it talks about them being hardened. Because Israel, they're looking for Christ, but they never found it. And the reason is because they were hardened. But here it says God gave them a spirit of what? This is quoting Isaiah 29, right? Now that's tough language. Like what? God personally deluded them? So how are we supposed to understand that? Go ahead, Ann.
It's the response of the person to God. And sometimes, you know how you'll say, you made me so mad?
Yes.
No. What?
No, I never say that to you.
Well, I say we do that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
It's the other guy's fault.
It's like they made me do it. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
That's what it's talking about.
It's my reaction to their behavior. And when the Jews didn't have a good and honest heart, when they seen Christ come, it didn't make it softer. It made their heart what? Harder. And God, that's how you can say God just gives them a spirit of well, here, what does your say other than stupor? Huh? Anybody? Stupor? Stupor? All right. What do you think it was, stupor? What would that be?
Well, they harden their hearts.
But what does that bring to mind, stupor? All right, so a drunken guy, is he in a stupor? Yeah.
God left them to be stupid.
Yeah, well, it's close to that word, right?
It is.
Right. With the more God reaches out to a person, and the more that person rejects them, the harder their heart gets. So can you say that God's hardening their heart? Yes, because that's what he said about Pharaoh. He hardened Pharaoh's heart because he showed him his great power and miracles. And Pharaoh's, okay, I'll let him go. But it said Pharaoh hardened his heart. But then it says God hardened it as well. It's because when you see God and you see the glory of Jesus Christ and you continue to say no, that glory is hardening your heart even more. Does that make sense? Yes. So God's given them a spirit of stupor and eyes to see not and ears to hear not, because they're going like this. You ever do that when you're a kid? You're like, nah, 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 nah. I can't hear you. What'd you say? Oh, my ears. It works, doesn't it? That's what they're doing. But the more the gospel is preached and the more they don't want to hear it, they do this. So where is the rejection? It's on the person. Is that happening today? Yes. Max. That's what's going on today. And you plead with people and you wonder, why don't you get it? It's because they don't want to. And the more you share the love of Christ with them, it hardens their heart even more because they say no, 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 and they find can you search on the Bible, on the internet, why the Bible is full of lies? It'll give you a zillion pages. Can you search why Jesus is a fraud or something like that? I saw a guy just happened to fall upon it, why I left the Lord's church. Like, okay, and he gave all the stupid reasons that everyone else gets. If you want to find reasons not to follow Christ, can you find them easy?
Yes.
And the more you're convicted and you turn to that and you feel yourself full of lies, the harder your heart gets. Does that make sense? And God forbid that should be one of us. But our family members do that. Our loved ones, co-workers, friends, and people we know. Yes?
Well, my understanding of why the heart is hardened is because, maybe correct me, is because the Jews did not expect what God had planned for them. They had their own idea who the Messiah was going to be.
Well, that's partly the reason. But when you see a miracle, like Lazarus raised from the dead, they convene and go, what are we doing? If we let Jesus go on like this, everyone's going to believe in him. That's the exact words they used. Like, whoa, why don't you believe in him? And they said, we got to kill Jesus. And also who? Lazarus. Like, what? Even though they had a misconception who the Messiah is going to be, just the miracle should have woke them up. But it didn't. Now, here's a good heart. David, was he a wicked man? Adultery? and a seduction, and then committed murder and got away with it. Baby's born, and it's a year and a half later. Nathan comes to him, tells him this story about this guy who lost his little sheep to the rich guy. And Dave said, man, that guy ought to pay dearly. And what did Nathan say?
You're the man.
Thou art the man. It's you I'm talking about. Now, David's got a chance. What are his two alternatives? Fight back, like, no, you don't understand. And just reject him, or else what? Humble himself with godly sorrow. Which did he choose? Now, when you have the chance to learn that you are the man, you're a sinner, and you don't respond correctly, you're just going to harden your heart more. Even true for us as Christians. When your heart's pricked, that wound will make you more like God and more like Christ, but if you don't respond, it will callous over. And when you have a scar tissue, it can't feel pain anymore, right? A scar tissue. You'll get harder and harder and harder. So the very gospel that saves one will harden another person's heart.
That's right.
It's crazy, but that's how it works. Does that make sense to you all? So that's what he's saying here. See, the Jews, the problem's not with God. So David said, let their table become a stumbling block and a retribution. Let their eyes be darkened. And he's just quoting what was going on in his day, and Paul's using it to apply to the Jews of this day. Jesus said the same thing. You're like your fathers, who killed the prophets but then built tombs for them, right? And he said the same thing to them. They were just as bad. So here we got verse 11 now. Does that mean Jews can't be saved?
No.
Well, let's keep reading. Verse 11, I say then, did they, that's talking about Jews, stumble so as to fall? And it means never to be able to be saved. He goes, may it never be. He always asks questions and answers it, okay? So the question is, can Jews still be saved? Yeah. And I'm going to ask the same question, can anyone be saved today?
Yes.
So it applies to anyone. I don't care how bad they are, okay? But by their transgression, notice this, salvation has come to Gentiles to make them jealous. This is what's really kind of amazing. You got to follow with me. Because the gospel was preached first to the Jews, but when they rejected it, God turned to and that made them even madder, so they went after Paul and the Gentiles trying to persecute them. But here, God said that was on purpose to make them what? Now, jealous seems to be a bad word, but we'll explain what he means. Now, verse 12. If their transgression, that means the Jewish, becomes riches for the world, that means who? For who? Gentiles. And their failure be riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? In other words, if their transgressions open the door to the Gentiles, but it was meant for the Jews to start with, can they come back and be fulfilled themselves? Absolutely. Verse 13, I'm speaking to you who are Gentiles now. Inasmuch as I'm an apostle of Gentiles, I magnify my mystery, that if somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen and save some of them. Does Paul love his Jewish brethren?
Yes.
He said, I wish I was anathema for them. I say they have a zeal for the God, but without knowledge, and my heart's desire is their salvation. But verse 16, if the first piece of dough be holy, the lump is also. And if the root be holy, the branches are too. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive, now he's talking about the Gentiles, you, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them and become partaker with them of the olive root of the olive tree. Don't be arrogant toward the branches. But if you be arrogant, remember that it's not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. And you're probably getting lost by now, but it's okay. I'll explain this. Verse 19, and you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. Verse 20, they were broken off for their, you got to highlight that. They were broken off, why? Unbelief. Not because God rejected them, because they refused to believe. But you stand by your faith, don't be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, who's that? Jews, neither will he spare you, the wild branches. All right. Behold the kindness and severity of God. Now, let's explain this so you can understand what's going on. This word jealousy, let's go back here. How do I explain jealousy in a good way? So, you got an idea?
I got an idea.
Go ahead.
Well, my idea is they constantly made God jealous.
Yeah.
His people did it many times, and now here God is making them jealous to show them that he can give to whoever he wants.
Yeah.
But I look back and I think of 1 Samuel 8 and verse 7, and the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you, for they have not rejected me, or you, they have rejected me.
That's
that
right.
I should not rule over
That's
them.
right.
God was hurt, and he comes out here and he's making them jealous, and he's showing that, he wants you to come to him. He desires that.
Yeah.
And
So,
he doesn't want to have to resort
so should a husband be jealous for his wife? Yeah, he doesn't want her having other relationships, right?
Right.
Jealous. That's a good jealousy, right?
Right.
And is God jealous for us? He doesn't want us to have relationships. Well, the Jews had a relationship with God, but now they're seeing Gentiles exercise that, like, whoa, that's what we want, and it should make them feel so bad. I want what they got, so they won't continue in their unbelief, but now they'll become believers. Have you ever seen someone take a path like, man, I want to do what they're doing. I'm jealous in a good way of what they're doing. Whether it's fitness or health or whatever, you want what they got, and you can now do it because you saw them do it. That's what it's talking about here. And that's what God's doing. It's okay, watch this, Jews. You're going to reject me. I'm going to turn to the Gentiles. That's going to make you jealous, and it's going to make more of you come to me. God will use anything you do to achieve his will. But still, some will and most won't. So, and we can further that too. Well, I'll talk about some other time. So, when we talk about this, he's going to make his fellow countrymen jealous so he can what? Save what? I underlined it. Some. What's this false doctrine we started with? Jesus is going to come and save what? All. Paul never had that in mind. He just wants to save what? Because there's always going to be what? A remnant. A small portion of those who have good hearts that are faithful. Not all, but what? Some. Now let's explain this grafting of them, okay? So we talk about grafting. Who is the root from which all blessings come? Jesus said, I am the vine and ye are the branches. Okay? So if you're not attached to Christ, we're not a disciple of Christ. Now, who were, here's this stump called Israel, and God cut it off when the Old Testament talks about he just cut it off because they all rejected him. But then a shoot came out, and that's Jesus, all right? But who were the natural branches that were attached to God initially? Jews. But they were cut off for what? Their unbelief. And then when you graft something in, have you ever grafted or seen it done where they take a branch from another apple tree and put it on a Jonathan apple onto a what? Honeycrisp. When you graft it on, and one is the natural and the one is the wild, but it will take hold and it'll bear fruit. But if you can put a wild branch on a natural, could a natural branch take root even better or easier, be grafted easier? Who'd be the natural in this case? If they just come back. So he's saying to the Gentiles, you and me, don't get arrogant. Now, I just got to bring this up. Do we sometimes look a little with the disdain on people around us that aren't Christians? I hope not. And we get fed up and just all the things they're doing, like, God, I just hope you come quickly and just wreak vengeance. It's easy to do that because I know sometimes I catch myself like that. But he says, don't be what? Gentiles, arrogant. Because if you don't remain faithful, God's going to do what? Cut you off just that quickly. We just got to be grateful and humble and look to bring these other people in as well. That's what Paul's saying to these Gentiles. Because you're the wild graft, they're the natural branch. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Don't get arrogant, okay? So we look at this. The Jews rejected resulted in them being cut off, true? From the tree. But the result is the gospel is now taken to Gentiles. True? Follow this procedure. The Gentiles' acceptance moved some of the Jews to jealousy, some. And that brought the Jews that were jealous, it caused some to believe. So God makes everything work out for his glory. Your rejection will bring salvation to the Gentiles, and their Gentiles will make you jealous, and that jealousy is a good thing because it'll make some of you come back to me. Behold the kindness and the severity of God. Kindness to who? Those who what? Believe. Severity to those who what? Reject. That's right. So, some of you branches were broken off and you were wild, were grafted in. Don't be arrogant. We talked about that because, it doesn't start with you. It started with them. But they were broken off for their what? I highlighted that. Not because God rejected them, but their unbelief. So don't be conceited because God won't spare you, just like he didn't spare them if you become we got to stop here. Is it possible for a Christian to lose their salvation? Yes. Doesn't it sound like I was talking about here? Mm-hmm. Don't be conceited. If God did not spare the natural branches, Jews, he will not spare you. Does it sound like Paul's warning us that you can lose your salvation if you don't continue to walk in the faith? This is very important because there's another false doctrine that says once your name is written in the book of life, you're saved forever. You cannot lose your salvation. No, the righteous shall live by what? Faith. You cannot lose your salvation if you keep your faith. But once you give up your faith, you're giving up your salvation. You're rejecting God. It's so sad, but that's what happens, all right? All right, so let's go on here. The kindness and severity of God. To those who fail, severity. It's severe. Is that going to happen even today? Every time you share the gospel with someone, Julie, listen up, because I know it's frustrating sometimes. And they can either do one of two things, respond in faith or harden their heart and reject you. And your teaching is going to move them one way or the other. They can't stay in a vacuum. They're going to get harder. How do I say that? They'll have a harder heart, or they'll become soft and become believers. Either way, you've done the Lord's work. Either way. Does that make sense? It's not for you to save them. You can want it more than they want it. But they're going to be judged, and they're going to have no excuse because they say, didn't Julie come by to your house and try to plead with you? Yeah. What are you going to say in your defense? You rejected him. The severity and the kindness of God. The same gospel saves some, will harden others. And
I was just going to say, don't give up, Julie, because sometimes I was like this for quite a while, and, getting the gospel fed to me in pieces. And then my arms started to go like this.
yeah, you never know.
You don't know, so that person can go like this.
Okay.
In their own time.
It's so true. What's this language here? If you continue in his kindness, otherwise you'll be cut off. What does this mean? Continue in his kindness.
Continue to be faithful.
That's it. The only way you get cut off if you give up the faith. But we understand I get God's grace by my faith. That's his kindness. He just showers it upon me when I just trust him. Now I was talking with Bob Rao today. Do you have to understand what's going on in your life to have faith? No, when you have to know why, that's not faith, that's seeing. And faith that is seen is no longer faith, right? Faith says, I trust you even though I don't understand. I don't see why you're doing this, but I know I can trust you. And that's what it means. God's kindness will shower upon you, whether you understand or not, because you trust him. Otherwise, you're going to be what? Cut off. And if they do not continue, verse 23, in what? Their unbelief. This is so powerful to understand the rest of the chapter. God's only going to save the Jew that what? Fill in the blank. Does not continue in their unbelief, but become, as you said, believers. Okay? They're going to be grafted in because God is able. It's going to be easy for him to graft them in because it was to the Jew first in the first place. They're the ones who are ready for it. The only condition is what? If they don't continue in they will then be grafted in. Notice this then. He's going to save some of them. Because remember, there's always what? A remnant of the faithful. When the faithful hear the gospel, what will they always do? They'll believe. They'll believe. Thus, all of Israel will be saved in this manner. Look at, does anyone have the ESV? English Standard Version. Does anyone have it? Okay, I got it for you. Here it says, in this way, all Israel will be saved. If you're a Jew and Paul's talking to you in that generation, how are they going to be saved? By their what? Faith. That's how all of Israel is going to be saved. It's not saying that all of Israel will be saved, but all of Israel will be saved by what? Their faith. That's the only way they're going to be saved. No Jew will get saved except through faith. That's how all of Israel is going to be saved. He's not saying all of Israel will be saved, but all of Israel will be saved by their... Is that true today? Yes. The only way anyone will be saved is by their faith. Yes?
I don't know if you have a quick answer, but we talk about the Jew and the Gentile, and growing up I have a friend who's Jewish. I went with her to service once. I never quite understood, is their religion when they read this Torah, is that the Bible in their language, or is it a totally different?
Well, the Torah is the Old Testament, basically. And they read it in Hebrew largely, but it's in English as well. And that's their Bible. They don't accept the New Testament. In fact, when Mel Gibson came out with The Passion, remember that? And it really made it obvious that the ones that were responsible for killing Jesus at that day were the Jews. There was a big push, like, this is anti-Semitic, this whole movie, and we don't want people to try to evangelize as Christians because that's anti-Semitic, saying that we're not God's people anymore. There's a big pushback. It hardened their hearts even more. But they're very ingrained in it. Yes, they still think they're the Old Testament Jews to this day. And they still think Christ, the Messiah, is going to come, some of them, and save them. All right? And some Christians feed into that narrative by saying, oh, all the Jews will be saved someday. No. Okay, so let's look at this. We're in verse 25. I don't want you to be uninformed of this mystery, so you will not be wise in your own estimation, that a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of Gentiles come in. And so all Israel will be saved, just as it is written. The deliverer will come from Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them, and I'll take away their sins. This is the text people say, oh, that means there's coming a day that every Jew that's alive when Jesus comes will be saved. Everyone. Thus, all of Israel will be saved. Okay, so here is AD 58 when Paul's writing somewhere there to Rome. Were there Jews alive? Now, how many generations of Jews have lived and died until 2024? Hundreds of them of generations.
How many could prove their lineage?
Well, it doesn't matter, even if they could. Here, people would say, when Jesus comes, every living Jew will be saved. All of Israel will be saved. What about all the ones in between? They don't have a chance because they weren't alive when Jesus came, is the way they're teaching this. So sorry, you had to be alive when Jesus came, but all of Israel will be saved when Jesus comes. So sorry for you. No. All of Israel can be saved like every Jew has been saved. And that's by their what? Their faith in Jesus.
All Israelites cannot be saved that had already passed away and didn't believe.
Just like every Gentile cannot be saved if they died in unbelief. That's right. That's right. There's no difference between Jew and Gentile. We're all one. All right, so we'll talk about this, and there's going to be this. You were once disobedient, talking about the Gentiles, but you were shown mercy because of their disobedience. And because of the mercy shown to you, they now can be shown mercy because God has shut up who in disobedience? He has shut up all in disobedience. And this is very important because this is Romans 3. There's none righteous, no, not. For someone to come to Christ, they have to realize, I've been disobedient to God. If they don't get there and don't feel their unrighteousness and the wrath of God upon them, they're not going to want to seek salvation in Jesus. They have to be shut up in disobedience and really feel that pain. And that was John today. He knew it. He needed to have his sins washed away. He needed to get saved. And until you get to that point, people aren't going to respond. I don't care who they are. And that's what he's saying here. And so we have this prayer of praise that ends the chapter. And it's beautiful. He says, oh, the depth and the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. Does he always know what he's doing? And this plan is amazing. When you disobey, he'll use that to provoke other people to become Christians. And when they become Christians, he'll use that to make you jealous so you'll become Christians. He just wants everyone to become what? Christians, to be saved. How unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. We just got to trust him. For who has the mind of the Lord? Who would become his counselor? Nobody. Or who has first given to him that it might be paid back to him? God owes us nothing. We owe him everything. For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. All right, that's Romans chapter 11. I hope it helps. Will all of Israel be saved? Yes, by their faith. That's the only way they'll be saved.